Yeah, I know how to check the oil in my car. No, I don't need you to explain that. I just wanted to know when I could pick it up. Yep, I regularly check the air in the tyres. Yes, I know how to fill the water. Yep, anyway, can I... Friday 1 p.m? Cool, thanks, bye!
What's wrong?
Oh, I just had my mechanic on the phone, talking to me like I'm 5 years old.
Sounds like it was mansplaining to you.
Yeah, totally.
So what that is when a man explains something to a woman in an overly simplified, condescending way.
Yeah, Ron, I know what mansplaining is.
So in this situation, the mechanic was telling you how to look after your car when you already knew how to look after your car. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, Ron, that's exactly what he was doing. He was mansplaining.
I don't think you quite understand. How do I rephrase this? Okay. Because he's a mechanic and you're a woman, he probably assumed that you don't know how to do basic maintenance on your car, even though you do. So even though you've just called to figure out when you could pick up the car, he annoyingly over-explained all this information, wasn't listening. That's called mansplaining.
Yes, Ron, I know what mansplaining is.
What do you do now?
Now that looked annoying.
Yeah, I just had my mechanic on the phone talking to me like I'm 5 years old, and then Ron...
You know what Roman just did there, right?
Huh?
Roman just mansplained to you that the mechanic was mansplaining to you. He literally just did the exact same thing all over again.
Ellen, are you being serious?
I'm not making myself clear. How do I get through to you? By Ron explaining to you
Please stop.
what the mechanic did and not listening to you, he himself became the mansplainer. Am I making myself clear?
Yes, Ellen, I know that's what was happening.
Can I interject here? Now, I think I know what's going on. See, what Alan is trying to say is Rowan was being just as bad as the mechanic when the mechanic was trying to mansplain to you. Does that make sense?
Oh my god.
Real. You're gonna want that. Real. Yo. You're gonna need it. You're gonna want that.
Real.
You better stop and think about what you're doing. You better stop and think about what you're doing. You better stop.
Becky Sarwate. I am a born and raised Chicagoan. By day, I work in marketing and communications for a Fortune 500 company. And in my spare time, I'm a freelance sports writer and political journalist.
Hi, Medea Benton. I am an anthropologist, which is what I teach at Northwestern, and I am a specialist in epidemics and other stuff.
Hi, my name is Alicia Whittington. I am a research scientist, consultant, and musician, and also a Midwesterner, originally from St. Louis, Missouri.
I'm Demetrius. I am a high school teacher, and by day and in the evening, a university professor at DePaul, where I teach business and marketing. And just try to be active and keep my ear to the ground and my head to the song, keep things moving.
Check it out. It's Kevin Smith. I'm the media director of Area 309, and welcome to the next episode, the most recent episode of Think Tank 309. Before we start, I just want to say this. It's been a few weeks. It's been maybe a little over a month since we did our last episode, and I had to kind of take some time to deal with some personal, some health stuff, and I appreciate everyone's concern and everyone's well wishes and positive energy, and I'm doing well and I'm feeling good, and I'm looking forward to a million more episodes. So thank you to everybody before we get started. Thank you. And now that we've gotten that out of the way, today's episode I think is going to be a good one. I think it's going to be, particularly for me, it's going to be education. I'm really going to learn a lot, I think, from these, which I think is always good. Today's topic is mansplaining. which is a subject that I will admit I was not super familiar with until fairly recently. But I'm not going to go too far into kind of what my thoughts are. I want to talk to my panelists. So just to kind of start off, whenever we talk about these, I think getting a working definition is good. So to all of my panelists, and particularly my women panelists, tell us what your definition of mansplaining is, and then if you're able, can you tell us, how it's affected your life, or how it's affected your career or your professional life, or just kind of give us an introduction of kind of what you think mansplaining is and how it's affected you. So whoever wants to start.
Mansplaining, as I've experienced it, is the definition I'm going to offer, which is the air of intellectual superiority, I think, ingrained in the patriarchy and all of its glories. Because I might also add, mansplaining, in my experience, has not been restricted to the kind of the hetero male. It has crossed every persuasion of man that there is, every color, every race, every creed, everything. So it, for me, is a patriarchally based assumption of inferiority, both intellectually, I would argue physically, that I think many men operate with very unconsciously. I do not think most men are out there practicing mansplaining by conscious effort, but it is the assumption that you need help, education, something broken down for you. You need, some man to place whatever experience, situation, emotion, whatever, in a context that is digestible for you, because you are by nature unable to reach the level of the gentleman with whom you're conversing.
Well, when I think of mansplaining, I think of this this cartoon, and you've probably seen it on social media, where there's a man and a woman at dinner, and the caption says something to the effect of, "Let me interrupt your expertise and knowledge with my confidence." Mm-hmm. And that's something that I can identify with. And what I love about the fact, and this is rather ironic though, that the term exists, is because it's always been there, but I never had a name for it until however many years ago. And in terms of how it's affected my life, I am in a very male-dominated field, and then just, throughout my trajectory, and it's not just in science, even in music, where there's the tone that's associated with it, where someone's speaking condescendingly towards you. And it kind of, when it's intentional, it's meant to devalue who you are in that moment. And it makes you want to have a certain sort of, I've had visceral reactions to it, needless to say. And Kevin, you know this. But
why you gotta put me into your thing?
Because
I'm joking totally. No, but please.
And that's my answer, because. But we'll get into it more.
We will indeed.
So that's enough from me for now.
Okay. All right. Dr. Benton, do you have
I don't have anything to add to those. I mean, I think the key words are confidence, condescension, and the presumption, right? The presumption that you as a woman, for your womanness, your essence is inherently inferior, and everything flows from that. And I agree that I'm not sure it's always conscious, but I think that's also how patriarchy works, right? It's an ideology, it's ideological. So it's common sense. It's taken for granted dimension of interaction. So however it affects me, it's weird. I can't remember a time when I didn't experience it to some extent, but then there is, at this point, I kind of laugh at it, because it's, it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, I mean, if it makes you feel better somehow be smarter, that's cool, but you're gonna get it's gonna bite you in the ass eventually. So looking forward to it. But I do, yeah, I see it all the time. I experience it all the time. And in many of the industries that I try to work across. And I think, and I know we'll talk about this later, I do think that the way race intersects with it matters. I was young looking for a lot of my young years, and so age also intersects with it. The extent to which they won't defer, people don't defer to you and your experience or your expertise,
Right.
as a result of how you appear to be and what they presume about that. So it'll be interesting to talk about, at least.
Demetrius, my brother. Now I'm calling upon you. We're gonna answer. I'm gonna answer.
We're gonna have to. I understand
But
that.
I'm looking to you first, brother. So if you have a definition other than what the ladies gave us, then feel free to contribute. And then just, I guess, what was your first exposure to the term mansplaining?
Well, they nailed the definition. There's nothing I would dare to try to add. I wouldn't try to mansplain this definition. I think they got it. Being the father of a 20-year-old young lady and a 27-year-old young lady, I heard probably 10 years ago. And so I've been made aware of what the idea of mansplaining was and how it had an effect on them early on. Now, fortunately and unfortunately, they take after me a lot in that I can tend to be condescending and I'm better than you. And it's not because you're a female or male, or it's because I am me. So I can come off, if I'm not careful, in that tone, and they can as well. So they deal with mansplaining in a way that I just absolutely love, because when they feel like they are the victims of a man trying to exert his infinite knowledge by birth, because of his, additional body part that he must know more. The moment that happens, a switch goes on. I've seen them go, wow, on individuals. And I would just sit back and just say, well, you asked for that. And, and then so that part, like Adia said, just wait, you'll get it. It'll hit you.
You can get it now or you can get it later.
And you'll have that. And of course, because it is the world we live in, the intersectionality of age and race and other things that come into play with that, then expand. And then again, sometimes being aware that you may think what I'm doing as a man is mansplaining, but really this is me, and I'm the same person to you, whether you are male or female. But because we live in a world where there is so much the mansplaining that exists, I have to be aware of that to know that I may have to temper what I do differently with a woman, because I have to be aware that I'm effective in my communication. It doesn't come across as me being attempting to mansplain something to her.
Everyone's contribution to the working definition is good. So I don't think I really have to add anything. I see Dr. Whittington laughing because she was the one who actually exposed me to the term mansplaining. And I can't remember, what were we talking about, Alicia? Do you remember what we were talking about?
Pick anything, any day. And I'm just living my life.
That's not true.
That person, and somebody by the name of Kevin Charles Smith, that is, gives his, opinion or tells me what to do, and I'm like, thanks for mansplaining.
You see, Alicia, and I'll be honest, when I tell you what to do, it's not because I'm a man and you're a woman. It's because you're like my younger sibling. I tell Kenny what to do, and he wouldn't listen to me either. So it doesn't even matter.
Bring him in here so we can all just,
One of the concepts that I thought I heard from a couple of you is that in some aspects, some people do it intentionally. They mansplain to kind of assert almost the superiority, and they do it on a conscious level. And then it sounds to me like what I'm hearing is a lot of men do it unconsciously, or they don't even realize they're doing it when they're doing it. And I guess what I'd like to hear from you, if you could, provide some kind of perspective on, how you feel conscious mansplaining versus unconscious mansplaining works, and kind of what I guess the effects are on women trying to kind of live their lives and do, live and be professionals and kind of have careers and do different things.
I'm glad you asked this question. You remember when we were initially talking about me being on the show, I offered you a specific example of it. And this is of the most overt, intentional, like this dude clearly had some kind of problem. So I am the author of a book called Cub Sessions, Famous Fans of Chicago's North Side Baseball Team. And I interviewed some famous Cubs fans like Bob Newhart, like really going back to like the beginning. So I'm at Printers Row Lit Fest. And by the way, the book was sold for charity. So like all good. I'm at Printers Row Lit Fest at a table with my co-author who had gotten up to go to the bathroom. Co-author is a male, by the way. An old dude, whatever was going on in his head, I don't know, shambles up to me and says, I could have written your book. And it's like, here I am not even engaging you. Here I am with the book that I wrote, but you're standing like 20 feet away feeling threatened by whatever. And you felt the need to like come right up to me and negate my accomplishment to my face. Like that is among the extreme examples, right? Like that part, it's like, whatever's going on, it isn't about me. It's clearly about you. But in any case, in a public place, you're trying to diminish me. And in fact, I would argue, intimidate me in a public place. So that in my career as a woman sports writer and as a woman political writer, I have written critical articles about the NRA, and what I could tell you I have faced by written trolls as well as other people who might be bolder. Yeah, it's not safe for this program because I assume families engage with it at some level. But so that's of that kind. On the other end of the spectrum, and please let me preface this by saying this is a friend of mine. We've been friends for 15 years. We went to grad school together. I love him. We were talking about the Emmys after the Emmys, particularly Schitt's Creek and its success there. And I said, it was so nice to see Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara win those awards after like 30 odd years, whatever, we were doing this in Marco Polo. He replies in his polo, like, I swear to you, a 5-minute breakdown of SCTV, which is where, of course, Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara got their start, because he thought maybe Schitt's Creek was the first I had ever heard of these two people. Like Eugene Levy wasn't in Splash, which is one of my favorite movies. Like Beetlejuice never happened, right? Like, don't tell me who Catherine O'Hara is. So I got like hot about this. And in my return polo, I was like, you friend, this is the kind of casual mansplaining that's going to bring down our society, because don't tell me about Catherine O'Hara. And he like paused and he was like, I kind of see, like, he went on a long, like, it was a lecture. And like, this was time we could have been talking about other things. Cause again, I know all I need to know about SCTV. I loved it. So this is what I'm talking about. Like for women, it's every bit from like this daily nagging, this guy's cool, he just isn't thinking, to what I'm talking about, where I'm actually like confronted with it in a public place. So I would probably argue, and I would assume that my female colleagues here have experienced that gamut and that frequency as well.
That book thing, whew, that sounds so familiar. I can't even like, yeah, I could have read your book. Well, then why are you standing on the other side of that
and
table?
Here I
no book.
With the picture of me, the big picture of me is me, not you. So yes.
It's like, where's your book, friend? So I could have seen your book. No, I agree. Like there's the conscious. So, I mean, I get a lot of, you're too uppity, you need to be put in your place level kind of stuff. And it happens a lot, but there's one that actually kind of cracked me up. So I was invited to speak in the anthropology department at the University of Chicago, which, actually, maybe you don't know, it has a history. It produced a lot of very famous anthropologists. and a good number of them are, and I'll use the word asshole. So they just, it's sort of, that's their reputation. It's like an asshole factory. But I was ready because I was like, I love assholes. They're just like, it's really easy to just chop them up, serve them to people unknowingly, whatever. So, my friend is in the department, and he's in charge of invitations. He's also in charge of introductions. So of course he does this whole thing where he's like, Adia Benton, award-winning author of a book about AIDS, blah, blah, blah. And I give this talk about Ebola. And at the end of it, so there's like a hierarchy of who gets to ask questions first. It's usually like the senior emeritus, whatever. But I think they flipped the script. But anyway, this one older, well-known anthropologist raises his hand and he says, so have you ever considered thinking about like AIDS, HIV/AIDS? Have you considered, and this is after I have been introduced as a person who has written a book about HIV/AIDS, that book won an award. And it was just like, and I was like, but what part of I wrote a book about that didn't you hear?
Right.
That was like the first thing. The second thing he did was, I don't even remember what he said, but he was like, I really appreciated that you used the New Yorker in your example. And I was like, I don't know what to say about that, except it was like this very like old white, like, oh, I can validate you now. You at least young negress, you have read the New Yorker, so I can give you like a little bit of dap on that. But it was like, and not only that, he had a follow-up question, which my friend cut off. He was like, yeah, you don't get to ask one of those. Next, not only did that guy write my friend and say, you didn't give me a second chance, he then came up to me afterwards and was like, I'm serious about this AIDS question. I think you would get some real mileage if you do some more about HIV/AIDS. And I was like, like, no. Anyway, that's just like one of those, but that's a professional one where, I mean, obviously I don't think he consciously thought of himself as doing this thing, but it's so ingrained. Imagine what all his students experience. Imagine what his colleagues experience. Imagine how, those interactions are a part of sort of the daily fabric, right? That's how I see it, is if he's doing this to some person who's visiting, if he's showing his ass to the visitor, he's doing it amongst his colleagues, his peers. And he's been doing it for 50 years because he's been sitting in that room, right? And he's teaching that, modeling that behavior to people in the room. That like complete condescension. And so, I think about that kind of stuff a lot. And then there's like the daily stuff, right? There's like that kind of, oh, well, what do you know about Africa? Have you heard of this thing that's going on? COVID-19 or Ebola? Like what? Anyway, I get a lot of that, but anyway.
Gosh, speaking of the pandemic, let me tell you.
Now, I'm sorry, pardon me, before you start, pardon me, but Alicia, go into what your educational background is specifically, because I really want to hone in on that.
So my graduate training is in public health, specifically chronic disease epidemiology. Within that, I focus on genetics and molecular epi. And if you don't know much about epidemiology, for those who are watching, it is the study of the distribution and determinants of diseases throughout a population. So the difference between medicine and public health is that medicine, the patient is the individual. For public health, the patient is the population. So my doctorate is in health systems management, which is essentially how people access healthcare. And so given, the current pandemic, like this is basically the, not dress rehearsal, but kind of, sort of, and performance for public health. And I've had this conversation with so many of my friends and colleagues where people are trying to explain to us pretty much anything about the pandemic. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I've been in this for a very long time. Also, one of my passions within public health is health disparities. And you would be amazed at, how many, throughout all these years, where someone will say to me, oh, this is all you have to do to cure this, or to, reduce this particular burden of disease and blah. And I'm like, no. And if you actually had the answer, that wouldn't be a problem in society. So it is absolutely amazing what people will say with the utmost confidence. I could talk about this all day long, but I'm not trying to take over the conversation. But it's been interesting. Where people will, for example, I've given a lot of free consultations this year on emergency preparedness plans, talking to individuals that sit at the tops or, decision making within their respective organizations. And I break everything down for them. And then they're like, and then they try to explain my field to me. And I'm like, oh. And what's really sad is when you're in school and it is not an easy subject, like all the things that I've studied and so many things that have happened. Pretty much any public health professional could have predicted some of these things, yet no one listened. And I'll be quiet there.
I actually have a theory about that, but I'm not gonna. And it actually has to do with mansplaining.
We have all these things that are these great thoughts, but no one wants to share them. I
want to hear that. I want to hear the theory.
I want to require someone to share.
This is important. I want to hear the theory.
There's the thing. So I actually, so the funny thing is I also studied public health. It was my first, I did a MPH, but I worked in the field for a little while. But one of my projects is actually studying how public health it's public health meta, right? Like how public health kind of constructs its objects, blah, blah, blah. And so one of the things that I noticed when I was first doing my MPH and looking, I was like, everybody in here is a woman. Like I did international health and there were 100 people in that program. And I think there were 2 men. And I remember they were like, oh, this is great for our dating. But what I also noticed was that the way expertise was understood, public health expertise was understood, is also shaped by the feminization of the field. So in other words, your expertise, while great, extraordinary, deep about institutions, about models, like how to construct models, how to build them out, all of those things are once those became feminized, they are also downgraded in sort of the way that people talk about it, except if epidemiology is not exactly like that. So there's a little bit of a math bias. The math bias also reflects that sort of gender difference. And so there are a lot of economic modelers who are men and engineering modelers who don't have health services or epidemiological expertise who are saying, I can run that model and tell you how big your room should be and how your airflow should look when you're doing your COVID planning. They'll straight up. So there are universities that use economics models built by economists. Some dudes sitting in the economics department did not talk to the public health people, did not talk to the public health modelers, did not talk to the epidemiologists. And they totally built their whole model, their whole little death model on 2 dudes who sat in a room and said, oh, we can figure this out. Public health is easy. We do hard math. We do math that matters. That is actually how they talked about themselves. They were like, there's nothing that the challenges of public health are too practical. Economics, the economy is complex. So when we do our models, we're going to be able to. So just to bring it all back around, the mansplain is baked into how information circulates, which information is legitimized, deemed legitimate by the people who have the power to make decisions. The economic perspective was more seductive because it allowed them to open up the doors when they should have told everyone to stay their asses at home.
A little bit to continue that thought, I mentioned that my book's co-author is a man, and a man who has published other sports books. So the other subtle form of mansplaining / discrimination I faced was that somehow he was a charity case who'd taken the lady sports writer along for the ride, right? He's the expert because he's written the books before, and I'm somehow blessed by his name being on it, so I'm allowed to speak, but otherwise, right? Otherwise, why don't I have my own book? There was definitely like subtle strains of that throughout many things. But the interesting part was, since I'm the marketing and communications person, like I ran the social media, I put together the book launch and got the Budweiser Clydesdales there and Fergie Jenkins, right? But it's like, I'm not legit unless like there's a dude writing co-author with me, because lady sports books don't sell. Where it's assumed that if you're there, it's because the boys let you play. They open the door and let you in. Right. It's not because you're there on your own merits.
Right. Now, let me just say this before I jump in, and Demetrius, I'm coming to you next.
You good.
Now, I was not a college professor, but as a lot of people know, I worked in public access television for 13, 14 years. I worked at 2 different places, and my role was similar in kind of both places. So when people would come in to edit their particular TV shows or whatever they did, if they had problems, they would come help me. They would come ask for my help, and I would go help them. Or if they needed equipment, I would help them. Now, I will say this. I work currently, and I've always worked in kind of technical fields. So usually what I'm doing is explaining something technical to somebody, be it a man or a woman. Now, what I've noticed, and I mean, not condoning it, not saying it's okay, but I think like what Adia and all of you have said about the masculinization and the feminization of different industries. I think very technical things that deal with technology and IT and different things, I think are still relatively fairly masculine. So when I was working at this place, I'd have people waiting in line for my help when there was my female coworker sitting right there. It's like the bad barber in the shop, but she knew just as much as me, if not more than me. Like, she has an actual degree in video production or whatever, whereas I'm kind of self-taught. But like, I think I guess what I'm saying is I've seen that, I think, at different levels. You see it at a very kind of academic and like higher education level, and I see it more on kind of a ground, just functional day-to-day stuff. But I think I do see the masculinization and feminization of different kind of industries. Demetrius, coming to you as a man who kind of, in one aspect, you are an educator. So people are literally coming to you for evaluation, they're coming for education, they're coming for validation to some degree. So like, how do you, and I'm maybe asking this kind of, for real education, is what's, in your encounters, what's the best way to kind of temper being there to educate and being there to inform, but while not being someone who goes into get into the mansplaining territory?
That's a great question. It's really, you're asking how is a man to be an ally to women in these areas. At least I hear the question. I'll answer that first. To Adia's point about Canada, we have a country that was smart enough to realize that their national anthem was a little bit gender bent toward males, and actually changed the words to their national anthem. So Canada's a wonderful you know, they got some wonderful ideas about doing things a little bit differently than the U.S. to what we've done. They took out sons and put our, and all they put in us. So they literally changed that in the national anthem. That's, to me, that's huge. Couldn't imagine them changing the American national anthem because it left out a portion of the population, especially women.
Or because the whole second verse is
well, that's
to slavery, but
the whole third verse, yeah, that's a different podcast. Different Good to know.
Right.
But I think it's important that when I'm giving information and I'm validating, even when I'm researching things, that I am actively searching for women's voices in the information I'm giving. I am actively looking for a woman researcher, a woman doctor, a woman editor, or a woman expert in the field, so that when I am giving examples and information to someone, I am able to say, well, if you would read Jill such and such, or if you'll read Jane such and such. And so I'm making sure that my validation does not just come from a long line of male patriarchy led, because it's easy to do, to just take the first thing that pops up and then it's all going to be written by men and you can just follow that line. But to be purposeful about searching out women's voices, other voices. I actually teach marketing. And so sometimes we're in groups, and I let the students choose their own groups. And of course, you know, 4 or 5 of the bros will get together and they'll be the group. And I'll say, okay, right away, you can't get an A on this project. And say, why not? I said, because undoubtedly you're going to market something that's going to leave off 60% of the population, of your buying population. You have no women in there. You have no women at your table to tell you anything about how to sell to a woman. So you can't perfect this automatically. And that's being purposeful about that and having that idea and having those thoughts in that. And forcing students from the high school level, from the college level, to begin to incorporate different voices and not just do what, unfortunately, men have been socialized to do, just take over and just use their confidence or just use their side, but to use some intelligence. And if this woman is bringing intelligence, man or woman, it doesn't matter. It's intelligence going to help you. But it comes about being purposeful to pushing that and not making an agenda, or it's making sure that people recognize you got to look past what's just given to you. Because in this society, in this world we live in, what's going to be given to you is going to be white man. That's what America's going to give you every day. You got to look past that. You got to find women. You got to find women of color. You got to find women of Latino descent. You got to find women of African American descent. You got to find white women. You got to find all, because those voices are who you're going to be selling to, who you're going to be working with, who you're going to be selling a car to if you're a car salesman, who you're going to be speaking to if you're at an anthropology event, who you're going to have to work with when there's a pandemic that's destroying the world, and these are the experts who know what to do. You've got to be able to know the work. And so I am actively pushing that. And when I talk, and I'm purposeful about making sure that I'm inclusive of that. Because if I'm not, then I'm leaving off part of it. And it takes away, as a black man, it takes away my ability to argue and complain about inclusiveness of black people. Because if I'm not being inclusive of women, how can I get mad about people not being inclusive of black people?
One of the things I've consciously tried to do since Alicia kind of exposed me to the term mansplaining is I mean, most of my job, as I said, is explaining things to people. But even like if I'm explaining something to my mother, I try to really examine what the energy I'm coming with. And I really want to say, I'm just coming to inform and give my opinion. I'm really not trying to assert any kind of innate superiority, because it doesn't exist, first off. And I don't want to kind of come off with that type of energy. But I imagine that for the ladies on the panel, there are people in your life that you would consider to be habitual mansplainers. And I mean, the level of kind of malignancy versus just benign mansplaining is probably different, but just from your perspective, what's the best way to deal with someone who is kind of a habitual mansplainer?
Props, Charlie Murphy. I like that.
Right. Bruh, let me just say this before you guys start. On the notes, me and Alicia were typing, and I typed this question, and after this question, I have on there, shouts to Charlie Murphy. I just want everyone to know. But anyway.
Yes.
There's very little risk of him listening to this. So my father-in-law is habitual. Now, the things I keep in mind, right? Because he's very liberal. He votes all the right ways, right? Like, he loves gay people. Like, he's not that guy, even though he's from South Dakota, right? But he is from South Dakota. He is in his 70s. He was a retired pharmacist whose job it was to consult with people and advise them on things. But sometimes he is very tough to take because he has been out of the real world, so to speak, for like 15 years, right? Like, his house is long paid off. He's retired. He's like the mayor of the gym in the before times, right? He just go around like talking to all his friends and like handing out towels. Like, he's that, you know, he's just very chatty. But there are times, right? Like the car buying example, before we started this show, I was talking about how my husband and I just bought a car, and I, in fact, was the chief negotiator. And in a rare experience in my life, I was respected and it went well. Well, last weekend, I was talking with my father-in-law about how we were looking for a new car. And to put this very succinctly, my husband is fully immunosuppressed. He has Crohn's disease. He takes 2 shots of Humira a month. He cannot be like interacting with the public. So I was like, this is what I want. I want a good deal. I want not to have to sit in a dealership for like 4 hours. I don't want my husband. And my father-in-law is like, well, you're going to have to go to at least 2 dealers and blah, blah, blah. Nobody will do that kind of stuff on the phone. So like, when the deal came together and I got everything I wanted and I slept the sleep of the righteous, which is what, you know, because being, you know how Kate Moss said, nothing tastes as good as being thin feels? For me, nothing tastes as good as being right feels, especially when it comes to talking with a man who told me like some other thing had to be the only way to do a thing. So when I closed the deal, I was like, good for me, you know, but then like silently, because he is my father-in-law and I love him, I was like, suck it, John. Because like the whole way through, it was like, it can't be done that way. You don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 blah. And this is someone who loves me and respects me and all this stuff, but he's one of those like of a certain age, from a certain region, he's just gonna always be a habitual mansplainer. And I would add, to what Demetrius said about him just sort of being that way, John is sort of this way too, but it is much more so with the women in his life. It is much more so. Like, if he hits a man who pushes back even a little, that's the end of the mansplaining. With a woman, I mean, would be that me being like, no, I'm gonna do this instead, would actually shut that down, but it doesn't.
Becky, I'd like to be invited to a family dinner. We can team up. Yeah. We can team up. So, and Kevin knows this about me. So while Kevin is like a paper brother, I have 6 biological brothers and a father that, you know, he's in his mid-80s. And so I feel like I've been training all of them since I emerged from the womb as a feminist. And in fact, my siblings, they laugh at me because one of the things that I always say when we're together is down with the patriarchy. And I've always questioned things that I didn't think were, let's just say, equitable. And what I am proud of is that with them, I've been able to have an impact. In fact, they will call me and tell me like, you'll be so proud of what I did today. Like, whether it's identifying where someone else mansplained a woman and they spoke up, and essentially normalizing calling it out. And with my brothers, they always said that they're glad that I didn't become an attorney because I'd be a force I'm like, actually, that wouldn't be the worst part of it. But anywho, that's neither here nor there, another podcast. But they are I don't want to call them my guinea pigs, but I have been experimenting on them, like, just strategies for how to have these conversations when I am mansplained. Because let me tell you, my first reaction is not so nice, and it would probably clear out a room.
You were very not nice to me. I just like to point that out. Thank
Whatever. I mean, but the thing is too, though, Kevin, whenever it happened, what did I do? I pointed it out.
You did. I can't front.
And
Absolutely.
so, just, keep educating those around you. And Kevin, I mean, you were such, I don't want to call you a habitual offender.
Yep.
Intention was not to be malicious whatsoever. And that's really important too, because depending on the type of relationship you have with someone, that, puts things into context. Like, I know that you wouldn't, purposely try to belittle me, but it is surely fun checking you on this. You better believe it will never stop. And Kevin has experienced this too, where he tells me about his other interactions with friends or, just going out, whatever. And I'm like, did you mansplain them? And Kevin, you're much smarter, intellectually, than so many people that, I'm sure that
slow down.
Here,
Slow down. Yes.
that it's a daily struggle for you.
Well, no, I don't even know what to say. I don't want to minimize mansplaining, because I realize that mansplaining is real, and I realize that mansplaining is something that we don't need. I also think there's other splaining that goes on. I've had a lot of health stuff go on in the last couple years, and I've noticed that even dealing with nurses who aren't Black, I think sometimes they talk to me like, I get told to bring your prescription bottles to the appointment so that you'll know what they are. Like, no, I can write them down or put them in my phone and I'll read them off like any other person. Like, I get talked to like when I go to certain clinics, I'll get talked to like I'm a child. And I don't think that's a gender thing. I think that's more of a race thing. I think.
Oh, Kevin. Oh, no, honey. Oh, you're going to open the Pandora's box here. You want to go to medical care and gender?
No, go ahead. By all means, go ahead.
Ooh, this could be a whole other podcast. The way women's pain and symptoms are habitually ignored, minimized. You don't know anything. Kevin, if you look hard enough, you will find multiple stories a day of women who died from men not believing them.
Mm.
So I'm not saying that there's no racial element to it, but oh, yes, there is a gendered element to it. Look at the fight we're having on the Supreme Court, which is going to come down to women ultimately having the right to make decisions of their own bodies. This is up for public discussion. It always is. I just had to stop you there because you were almost mansplaining about how discussions of healthcare are not ever gender based.
Well, no.
I put brakes on it, Kevin.
And I appreciate you looking out for me. I'm not saying that there is no mansplaining within the kind of the healthcare.
To many medical professionals, if you are a woman, you are a child, and there is no difference. You don't know anything.
I guess all I'm saying is that I've experienced something similar, not because of gender,
for sure,
but because of other factors. That's all I'm saying.
And certainly the race issue matters, and it again matters. And I was going to say, the interesting thing is some of women's problems are actually medicalized. So in other words, if a woman says, "Oh, I'm in pain," they're like, "Oh, we should give her an antidepressant." They'll say, and that's actually part of the training. that is actual clinical training. And I have one of these, another intersectional story about, like I gave birth twice, right? So you can imagine what that looks like. And I was always early. I was like 2.5 weeks early. But the first one was fine. I have to admit, they was pretty, but the second one didn't happen actually during the labor, as weird as that was. It happened in the moment after I gave birth to the second one. And I had the conversation with his dad, like, and it's the hospital that my husband was training in at the time. Like he was doing his fellowship. And so people knew, but this woman did not know. She was coming through to talk about circumcision for our boy. And I had been told, because I knew that my husband was not going to be there. He said, I don't want to see a resident cutting that foreskin. That's what he said. He said, no resident, number one. And then he said, number two, make sure that it, he had like a list. And I said, okay. And I said, and I will read the consent form, because that's what I do. I'm the person who reads the consent form. So when the woman comes in, when the doctor who's performing the circumcision comes in, I have the television on. And I'm like, she comes in, I turn it down and I say, okay, talk. And she's like, oh no, you have to turn that television off because I don't think you're gonna be able to understand me if you do. And I'm like, bitch, I do 5 things at once. I wrote a book watching Burn Notice, so don't even tell me like I can't watch. So I was like, no, I'm fine. Tell me what you need to say. And she was like, I'm sorry. She was just like, she picked up the remote control and then started to try to explain circumcision to me. And I said, that's fine, I'll just read the paper. And then as I'm reading it, she was puzzled that I was reading the paper, first of all. And I said to her, I don't see anywhere in this consent form that explains how you're, like, what you're doing with this, how you dispose of it, blah, blah, blah. You need to explain this to me. And I said, I also don't see anything about who's actually going to do it. Is it you? Is it the resident? Because I don't want a resident to do this. And she looked at me and she was like, oh, what do you do for a living? Because at some point she was like, oh, maybe this woman has some damn sense. And I was like, we don't have time for this conversation. When you walk into this room, you talk to me like I'm a grown ass person.
Right.
Like you don't tell me to turn off my like Portuguese soap opera. You don't tell me to turn on. You just meet me where I am, not where you think I am, and go from there. And I kind of had to tell her, like, know your place, which is to cut the foreskin and to do it in a way that is the right way.
Right.
And to listen to my concerns, and that's it. But it was sort of like, she kind of was like, oh, my brother's an anthropologist too. And I was like, well, that's nice for him.
Like, that's great.
Great. Bring my baby back without the trauma. Okay.
Right.
But yeah, it's just sort of like, that's that moment though. And I know you've read about, the maternal mortality rates for Black women and how so many of these women were like, doc, I just don't feel great. I am, they end up dying they hemorrhage. They have these problems with blood pressure. It kills them.
Right.
Because they don't trust that you understand you. And that's just double, it's bad for women in general, but it's just.
Or you're really drug seeking or anything.
Right. You're drug seeking, you're this, you're that. Like I literally, my first pregnancy, the person next door to me actually was a heroin addict. And they were having that conversation. Don't ask me how I knew our bathrooms were connected. It was just, but I kept thinking, the way they're talking to her, I wonder if they would talk to me like this. I wonder if this would be the same conversation, if this opioid conversation looks the same for the woman next door, who definitely was not a Black woman, who definitely was not a brown woman. It was very, very straightforward. Oh, I hate needles. They scare me. Oh, but I also have a, hair. And I was actually kind of going, everybody was like, okay, honey, it's okay. Calm down. But I had a moment where I was like, could I have had this conversation? Like, do I tell them about, like, there are all of these questions, and I have dealt with it, but I've also gone, I happen to know how you're trained. So I kind of have to do that extra work. Which isn't to say this is not answering the question of the habitual mansplaining.
No. This is good. Good.
But checking people in those positions, next time they see somebody, maybe they'll think twice. Maybe they'll have the opportunity to change.
Right.
I mean, I could tell.
Now, Adia, I know in terms of checking folks, I know, and we've been kind of tongue in cheek about it. I know Alicia has been very gentle with me in bringing my mansplaining to my attention. I mean,
You think so?
Well, I'm trying to be nice, Alicia. You're not letting me be nice. No, but in all seriousness, like, Alicia and I have a close enough relationship where she can be like, Kevin, you're tripping. And I'll even go to Alicia sometimes, be like, Alicia, am I tripping? Like, if I'm tripping, tell me. You know what I'm saying? But I guess you don't know everybody as well as Alicia and I know each other. I guess the question is, my question is it better to be direct and forceful, or is it better to be gentle? I mean, or is it case-by-case basis in terms of checking folks?
Kevin, real quick, if I can jump before the ladies answer this. I just want to give some props to the way they have been checking, especially Alicia, because you would fit in with my daughters quite well. Because they check me continuously to the point where when I am speaking, and I've been on the podcast, Kevin even heard me say this, I hear my daughter's voice in the back of my head. And it says, they've set a filter in my mind now that as I'm talking, I'm running it past, how would they hear this? Would this work? Is this something they would have a problem with? So when you all help those who you are closest with, your friends, your brothers, your fathers, because I'll be attempting to dad-splain something to my children. That's a different thing. Dad-splaining is I'm the dad, and so I'm right because I'm the dad. And they will call me, that's mansplaining. They'll call me on it, and I will say things. Yeah,
dad-splaining and mansplaining, I'm sure there's a very thin line between the two.
They actually want to be the same thing. As I've been taught that they're really the same thing. They're not much difference in that at all, because you have to be a man to be a dad, and so it works out. But I want to say from my personal experience that continue to work with those men who are closest to you, who can hear you, because you can change the effect of them and change the way. So Kevin, Kevin asks you now, am I tripping? Am I in the right spot? My daughter's voice are in the back of my head when I'm speaking now about saying things, to the point where we were joking about the Mark thing. I heard my youngest daughter say, why has it got to be Mark? Why can't it be Martha? Right? So that's actually where that came from, was that voice in the head. So continue to light it into us who are closest to you, because you're not always going to change the guy who shambled up to Becky's booth. I love the word. But the guy who shambled up to Becky's booth, his mind's not going to be changed necessarily by Becky in the book. But you can change those men who are closest to you, and to get them to see and realize what they're doing wrong. So I appreciate that you all do that you do that, and keep doing it to us. We need it. Because we're raised to be dominant. We're raised to be right all the time. We're socialized that we have to be this way. And it doesn't work. And so we need to be re-raised, retrained. And the best way to do that are by the women who are closest to us. So our daughters, our sisters, our mothers sometimes, our significant others, they've got to impart those filters in our head to make us think about what we're saying.
Case by case basis, because I think this question of closeness, I could say that stuff to my husband and be like, and actually he's definitely one of the four. I'm always impressed when he'll describe some situation at work and he'll be like, that's pretty sexist, isn't it? And I'll be like, yeah, it is. And then what did you do? And he's like, oh, I said something, but now everybody's mad because I'm not supposed to be the one to say it. And I was like, well, they're sexist. They hate Black people. Cool. You say it. You're a traitor now. But at least you can sleep at night. At least you can sleep at night. But there's some people that I actually feel, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like you can do a rough check on people that you're not going to see again. You know what I mean? You could just be like the guy who was like, but what about AIDS? I was like, I wrote a book. You know, I kind of was like, I wrote a book about AIDS. And also, did you see the thing I said about the New Yorker? I actually do the New Yorker thing for older white people. I say things like, well, it was on NPR this morning. Didn't you know? And they usually go, oh, yeah. Oh, I did hear that on All Things Considered. But but yeah, like, I feel like you do have to kind of, you decide on who you want to change, and then you decide who you want to piss off.
And I would also argue, like Demetrius is right with the your inner circle, right? Your husbands, your brothers, whatever. But we have to also decide where we're going to allocate our labor, right? We can't spend our whole time. I mean, Kevin, if we had to stop every time some man was mansplaining to like give him a gentle correction, A, that is too emotionally taxing, and B, time-wise, there just isn't hours in the day. So as much as we need to keep doing the work to a degree with the men that are closest to us, we also need our allies to try to make that easier on us. And it sounds like yourself and Demetrius, and certainly my Bob, we were at dinner with an older white male friend a couple years ago, and he was a couple drinks in, and he's like, women just don't know how hard it is to be a man. And Bob, my husband, is very deadpan. He was like, it is not harder. It is not harder to be a man than a woman. And he just kept like calmly repeating it. And I was like, thank you, Bob, because you, white man, are talking to this other white man, right? And you're being adamant about it. And he's going to go home and think about it, probably in ways that me saying so would not do it, right? So we also need our allies to help us out. We can't do all that work. We can't just, you know, like Adib said, it's case by case. I absolutely embarrassed that fool at Printers Row. I knew I would never see him again. And also he had a lot of nerve, and I needed to let him know that I was not going to be actually physically intimidated either, because he got all close. But like with my father-in-law, like when he says things like, those women who went to Charlie Rose's dressing room knew what they were doing, I can't be like, I can't go crazy, right? That's one where I have to be like, and think about what it costs us to do the swallowing, right? That little episode is just one of many where I had to be like, not now. And think about how much of that goes on in your average woman's life. It's a lot.
And I think what you'll find, and I'm not saying this, I'm definitely not saying this to minimize what you just said. What you said is 100% true. I think in any marginalized population, there's an element of that. I know Demetrius and I have talked about it. When someone in class says something like, you know, we'll be in marketing class and say, well, you know, certain populations can't afford certain things. We have to decide, you know, we're going to eat that one. That's not the hill to die on. Like, let's.
Am I in class today? Because class is going to be over after I go ham. Or do I just take it?
Right. Like, am I getting kicked out of this class? Is it worth it standing up for? You know what I'm saying?
Me and Kev talk about it after class.
Right.
But imagine what a black woman has to go through, where she has to deal with the black explanation and the woman explanation of it. Oh my God. That's why
LeBron was like, I'm sorry, I'm going to work with black women, right? Because even LeBron, who's probably had to put up with a whole bunch for being a black man, recognized in that moment when Breonna didn't get her justice that there is a group that gets it worse than me.
Right.
Like he was an ally.
Right.
But see, he possesses something now that makes him similar to me. He is a girl dad. When you are the father of a daughter, if you give a damn about your daughter, you have to begin to be empathetic about that part. You have to see that it's more than just how hard my life was as a man. I was a black man. I'm at a 10 every day. Was a black woman, you had a 10 plus 10. Wow.
Right.
And he has that as a husband and as a dad. He now, as a dad of a daughter, he now has that perspective to see that. And hopefully his wife and his daughter getting his ass like Alicia gets in Kevin's and my daughter's getting mine to make us better.
Alicia don't be getting on me like that. Like, I like, let's be clear. It's not that extreme.
That's what you think. Well, clearly I need to turn it up a notch then.
See, you know what?
Don't mansplain this. Let her have to.
We'll have to do a part 2.
I regret even bringing it up.
Becky and Adia, we can stage an intervention.
Well, look, everybody, I appreciate everyone coming in. If anyone has, this is going to be on social media. If anyone has anything they want to contribute, anything they want to add, feel free to comment on any social media platform. Just use the hashtag ThinkTank309. And if you can remember, use the hashtag mansplaining. But I want to thank everybody for being a part. And this is the last question. And we've kind of gone into this, but I guess I'm looking for kind of a final declaration from everyone. For men looking to mansplain less and to get to get some of that energy out of them, what would you suggest we do? What are some of the suggestions, if you have any, of ways that we can be less mansplaining and have more kind of equitable energy as it relates to our female counterparts, our women counterparts?
Well, first, I want to thank you for having me, Kevin. I'm smarter for every one of these that I come to afterward. Everybody that you have is brilliant. You know, some smart
No
people.
doubt, I would agree. But thank you, and you're definitely included in that, no question.
The easiest thing I think is to regularly converse with women. If you are like shouting into the wind and only talking to your male relatives and your brothers and your friends, and maybe the only woman you have any regular conversation with in a day is maybe a romantic partner, you need to expand your circle. It is not the case that men and women can't be friends. Make more women friends, have more conversations. It will expand everything, like it has for the men on here who also have, you know, in Demetrius's case is a wife and daughters, but just have more women friends, broaden your circle. Don't listen only to male voices.
I'd also like to thank you for having me on today, Kevin. We joke a lot, but this is a serious topic. And for men that are looking to mansplain less, I would say take some time to recognize your privilege. Like before you assert any opinion or explanation, consider your audience. Consider, you know, how things will land with them. And then ask yourself the question, am I able to say this a certain way or get away with certain things because I am a man? And by, you know, just recognizing your privilege, that's a huge step. And then just make an effort. A little effort goes a long way. And once you examine yourself, examine how it's happening in your environment around you. And then we can come back and do a part 2 of the podcast and see what everyone's learned, especially Evan.
Oh, wow. All right. Okay.
And those are my parting words. Thank you.
Kevin, I always think of you as a sensitive one.
I am sensitive. Ralph Tresvant ain't got nothing on me.
As long as that guy, actually, I was going to say that guy has deadbeat dad energy all over him.
Wow.
But just
Wow.
not, oops. Should I have said that? I feel, not you, Kevin. So, Kevin, I always think of you as the sensitive one. It's like, it's been ingrained since the first day that I met you. What was that? 25 years ago.
Man, that had to be 25 years ago.
25 years ago, I was like, who is Kevin Charles Smith? I actually had that. I said that to Lisa, and I was like, Kevin Charles Smith. That's a longer story. But anyway.
Bet he sounds waspy.
I think we must have had that conversation.
I think so. I think we did.
Who is Kevin? Well, there was another guy named Kevin Charles Smith, I think, maybe, who actually was like, so, you know, it's funny. I feel like mansplaining is like a symptom, you know, like it's diagnostic of this greater issue, which, you know, Becky and Alicia both pointed out, this patriarchy, this thing. And so, you know, but if I'm thinking solely about the question of the mansplain, or if you're a man in this moment having a conversation in which it is within your potential to actually mansplain, I would say every time you enter into a conversation with a woman, it might be worth thinking about what you think you're contributing when you say, what do you think she's asking for? And what do you think you're contributing in the moment, right? Like if a woman is like, oh, this bad thing happened to me, it isn't, usually that's a commiseration, a point of commiseration. If a woman is saying this, it's not a, and I also moment, right? Often it is about something else. And so, like I said, it's diagnostic of a bigger issue, a social and a structural one. But in the moment, that the negotiation that you're making as a man is, what do I contribute when words come out of my mouth? And do I want them to be supportive words or words that actually require a response that is not going to make me feel bad? Like those are the ways that you engage in a conversation with a woman. Which is to say, you imagine that the woman is like you, human, with a brain and an intellect and emotional reasons for actually exchanging words with you. So, and I don't know how that works with social media. Like you can't it's not the same, but I feel like the principle is there. Like, what do you think you're doing when you are entering into the conversation? What intervention do you think you're making?
Demetrius, I'm asking you a little bit different. What did you get from this conversation that we had about mansplaining? Explain to me, brother.
The continued fact that I gotta still learn. There's still more to go. There's still more for me to get. So it's great to hear it's great to hear and be reminded of how intelligent women are and can be. And it's great to hear that and be around that. And I agree that men need more women friends so they can do that, they can see that, they can have that, so that unconscious mansplaining that happens, maybe it doesn't happen as much if you have some examples in your life of intelligent women around you and you can see them. I think that's what I got out of it. Every time I come on, again, this is what I stated earlier, is that you always have such intelligent people on, and the women are always so intelligent and bring so much to the table that it just reinforces, yes, there's intelligent women in the world, and they have thoughts, and their thoughts are necessary for us to move forward. They're not just, they have thoughts that are necessary, that are needed, that without them, we're not getting anywhere close to half the story. And I'll answer the first question, because I sat and thought about it. I think, to quote, hopefully our next president, my advice to men was, man, would you just shut up? Just real talk. I mean, when women are talking, sometimes shut up. Don't say anything. They don't need you to read the directions for them. They do not need you to explain. Just shut up. Yes, Eugene Levy's great. Yes, he was on SCTV. Yes, your expertise in that does not impress anybody. Get over it. Yes, I'm watching a soap opera, able to turn the television down. You ask once, I don't do it, you keep going. Have an understanding of that. Just be okay with that. It's just shut up. Sometimes as a man, just shut up, because she got this. She really doesn't need your validation of it.
Thank you, brother. Now, let me just say this, and I know this may seem out of left field, but I promise I'll bring it back. I remember when I saw the movie Black Panther, one of the things, right. One of the things with Black Panther was it was about Black empowerment and about kind of Blacks asserting themselves in science and stuff. But one of the things that I got the most out of Black Panther is that the people who T'Challa looked to the most were women, all of them. Okoye was a woman. His sister, who made his suit and made his mask, was a woman. His mother, was the queen. Like, they were all women. His bodyguards were all women. Like, I guess I've been lucky in that I've always had super strong, super intelligent women around me. And if you look at my circle, if you look at any of these episodes, you see so many super, 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 super outstandingly smart women. all the time. But even with that, I know I fall into the same trappings that any man can, you know, because of the system that we're all born in. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think having women in your circle helps you. It does you good. You know, you hear those voices. But I think just because they're there does not mean that you're perfect. And I think it's important to have close people in your life, like Alicia is with me, to tell me when I'm not being when I'm not being the best I can be in terms of that kind of stuff. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for being a part of this conversation. I enjoyed it and I learned a lot. I think, Demetrius, I think you agree, you learned a lot. Anyways, Kevin Smith, Media Director for Area 309. This has been Think Tank 309. Thank you.